Hello, everybody. My name is Phil McDougall, and you're on What Drives Reno. And I am very grateful today. I have the one and only Joe Dutra from Kimmiecandy.
Yeah, life is sweet. I'm here.
Perfect intro. Life is sweet. Joe, we always start off the show by asking our guests what their first car was, and if there's a particular story that kind of ties to it.
I think my very first car that I ever owned was when I was about 17 years old, and it was a Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Of course, I would have preferred the 442, but I ended up getting a Cutlass Supreme because what had happened is my stepfather had a heart attack, and I ended up running a big ranch for my mother.
At 17?
At 17,
Wow.
when he was in the hospital for 3 months. And so when I had been accepted to college at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I was going to go to college, and my mother said, you can't go to college. You're going to have to run the ranch while your dad's recuperating. And of course, after a bunch of tears and, swear words, I proceeded to, run the ranch for a number of months. And then one day, my stepfather came out of the hospital, and he drove out. My mother drove him out, and he said, what color do you like? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, just tell me what color you like in a car. And I said, well, probably, what do I have to choose from? And he goes, blue or silver? And I said, well, silver. And he goes, okay, go get your car. And so I drove down to the Oldsmobile dealership in downtown Sacramento, and there was a brand new Cutlass Supreme
He gave you a brand new car?
Yep, brand new car. And that was how he said, and now you can go to college. And that was
Wow.
that was the car I drove into college, and it was one of my favorite cars ever.
Well, I could say that nowhere compares to my story. I worked for like about a year or so, and I think you put $50 down towards my car. So
Yeah.
you got a good deal. And the other part that I don't believe, though, in that story is you had some cuss words back then?
I
don't
did.
believe.
I grew up in on
can't
the
see that
farm.
with you.
I was a farm boy from ever. We grew up in Sacramento, and originally my father had a dairy farm, and he passed away very young in life. And when he passed away, my mother, married another farmer a few years later, and we moved out to Natomas, like around where the airport
Yeah,
is.
no, well.
And, we farmed tomatoes and rice and sugar beets and vine seeds out there. And of course, living on a ranch, you learn a lot of words really early, especially when you're working around equipment.
No, I
It's
bet.
usually when those thumbs hit the hammer hits the thumb, or you knock a tooth out with a crescent wrench because you pulled too hard and it slipped off.
You can get pretty creative after that.
You do, yeah.
So I kind of have a sense that your work ethic started at a very young age, and you've been very successful. So give us the Joe version. Condense your start in this business, because you've done a lot of different things. Every time I hear another story about you, it's like, I didn't know that part. I didn't know that. And they're all very different, like different lives, different experiences, but they're so vast, I think.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think I have a little gypsy in me. I always
Okay.
thought I was Portuguese, but now I'm thinking it's more gypsy. And so when I went to school, I was smart in high school. So I actually got accepted to UC Davis. And then my dad said, that's great. You can work every day after college. And then I thought, no, can't do that. So then for 1 year, I went down to Cal Poly Pomona and went to school down there. And then I came back up to San Luis Obispo. But what had happened was I ended up deciding at a bar one night, and the guys were telling us that they were all going to go to college in Europe. And I said, well, I'd like to go to college in Europe. And they said, hey, cowboys and farmers never go on these. We take all the smart kids out of school. And I said, bet you $10 I can get on in this program. And the bet was on. And so I was pretty smart in those days. And what I did is I took the woman that was running the program, that was the secretary, I took her out for a cup of coffee. And she told me, well, so there's like 3 parameters, like grades. If you got girlfriends or boyfriends in the States, that always drags people out of programs. And then how much money do you got to spend? And I said, well, how much money is it, could it cost? And they go, about $2,000 for the year. Okay, great. So when I sat in front of these teachers, and of course I had great grades in those days, and they said, your grades are really good. Do you have, a girlfriend that, could be dragging you back? And I said, with those grades, how could I ever have a girlfriend?
That's
right?
good. Yeah. Always
I'm
one step
studious.
ahead.
And then they said, and now we have to talk about the most important thing, money. And I said, my parents are going to be getting about 10 minutes onto a private jet. And they told me that if it was going to cost more than $40,000, I had to call them right now. And they said, "Oh, don't worry about calling your parents." And they just signed off. And so I ended up in Uppsala,
Wow,
Sweden.
you're good. That is smooth. That is smooth.
Yeah. So I ended up in Uppsala, Sweden, studied geophysics for a few semesters, and then
Geophysics?
yeah, that was the only thing I could get into. That was at that.
You couldn't call your dad on the jet and say,
No,
"Dad, I need to get a
he
different
didn't
major"?
have a jet. I mean, he
I
had
know,
a old Ford pickup, but then ended up buying a Volkswagen bus, a 1967 Volkswagen bus, and toured around Europe for like 3 or 4 months, and then came back up to Uppsala, graduated with the rest of the group, and then I just traveled until my mother found me in Barcelona, Spain, and sent me a note and said, "If you don't come back, you don't get to go back on the farm." So I flew back and farmed with my brother for a number of years. And then in the early 80s, when we were kind of going through this recessionary period like we're doing now, interest rates were horrible. We think interest rates are horrible now. In the 80s, early 80s, they were like 20%.
Yeah, people don't realize how high they were.
It was crazy, right? And so we were big. My brother and I were big farmers, and of course, we ended up.
What did you farm?
We farmed tomatoes. We
Okay.
farmed about 700-800 acres of tomatoes, and then we farmed rice and corn and wheat and barley. But what ended up happening is a couple of the companies that we sold to after they took our crops, like the tomatoes, like T.H. Richards, which was located in Sacramento, they went bankrupt and they owed us like $1.2 million. And then one of the grain companies that owed us about $800,000 went bankrupt. And all of a sudden we're, upside down a couple of $1 million.
Wow.
And so I ended up, my brother and I had a little piece of land that we had bought for the future. And so we had to sell that and got the bank cleared up. And then, I decided I needed something to do. And I had a couple of dollars and I decided to go work overseas. And so
how old were you when this took place?
So I was
roughly?
Probably in my 30s, mid-30s.
Okay.
I had been married and had a couple of kids and had put out an eye in a shop, thing.
geez.
I'd knocked a ball peen hammer onto a hardened gear and put a piece of metal through my eye. So I went blind in one side. And then I ended up getting a job working for a company called Hadco in Saudi Arabia. And it was working for the
Sacramento, all around Europe, back there, tomato farm. Now you're in Saudi Arabia.
I'm Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
I'm working for the youngest brother to the king, Prince
Okay.
Mugrin bin Abdulaziz.
Not just Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
but working for the youngest brother of the king.
Yeah. And so, I worked for him running a big 40,000 acre wheat and diversified farming operation. And then, unfortunately, I went through a divorce, had my kids living in St. Albans, London, and decided I didn't want to live in Saudi Arabia anymore after 4.5 years. And so I came back to Sacramento, broke, divorced, 2 little kids, and started all over again. And I felt bad because I didn't have a car, I didn't have a job, and all my friends at that time in their 30s already had their careers going. And it taught me humility, right? Mm-hmm. Because you talk to your friends and they would say, "Oh yeah, we got the car, we got the house and everything," and I'm like living in my parents' house. And so I ended up having a neighbor that was a farmer, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Nothing." And he goes, "Well, I'm not either." He says, "Let's do nothing together." And so we started a little company called West Tech that's still in existence today.
Farming company?
It started out as farming, and then it started out as consulting. And then I started teaching farmers from Brazil how to grow tomatoes. And that
Saudi Arabia, back to California. Now we're in Brazil. Okay.
So, and then that turned into a seed business and equipment business in Brazil. And then I got involved in some projects in Peru and Argentina. And then from that turned into growing tomatoes in Moldova and the Ukraine out of Odessa. And so
I didn't know any of this. I thought I knew him, but I had no idea of this story.
Well, you're getting a little bit of the background.
It sounds like I'm on an episode of, 2020 or witness protection plan or something. You're moving around.
Well, I never thought about
Yeah,
that.
okay, yeah.
You can't tell all the stories
Okay,
at one
Jack.
time.
Can we
right?
cut that part out? That's not supposed to be aired.
So and so anyway, growing tomatoes and seed business, and then West Tech, kept getting a little bigger. We started having our own brands of seed, and we were in Brazil, and then we started selling corn seed into the Middle East, and that turned into a fairly decent business. And then we have like an office in Abu Dhabi and an office in Cairo, and we're starting to develop some business in Libya. And so the Middle East became, kind of our base for selling non-GMO corn and alfalfa seed. And then in 2000, I ended up, a friend of mine that was in the almond business was going through some hard times, and I lent him some money. Actually, I gave him some money because I learned in Saudi Arabia, if you lend money to your friends, they won't be your friends for long because they're going through an issue, they're having problems. If they can't pay you back and you need that money back, well, then you'll lose that friend. So,
Wait, can I borrow some money?
yeah.
I like the deal you got there. The part you don't pay
you
back.
never know. Yeah,
Chris, you need some? No, but I totally respect that. That's amazing. That's what I know about you. That's the kind of guy you are. That no, I'm just going to give it to you with the understanding that you're in a bad situation.
Yeah. And so he came back. I said, you don't have to pay me back, but this will keep you alive for 3 or 4 months. You get a job, you do whatever. And one day he came into the ranch, and we were farming a little sugar beets then. And he says, Joe, there's 40,000 pounds of candy-coated, chocolate-covered sunflower kernels sitting in Oakland Port collecting demurrage. That means that they're charging daily rent for the container sitting there. And he said, there's a broker that I dealt with in the almond business out of Korea, and she said, we can buy it cheap, and I'll sell it. And then you can turn around, and we'll make some money. I'll pay you back the money that you lent me or gave me. And then he says, then after that, we'll split some. I said, can you sell candy, Mark? And he goes, I can sell anything. So we bring it out of demurrage, buy the candy, 40,000 pounds of candy. I put it out at the ranch, and I forget about it. It's like October. It's getting cool in Sacramento. And February starts to warm up, planting season. You're starting to go out, and I open up the back of the container, and there's 39,990 pounds, and I probably eaten 10 pounds myself. And all of a sudden, I call him up and I said, what's going on? And he goes, Joe, it's the worst business in the world. It's a good old boy business. You have to have, you got to pay for slotting. You got to have brokers.
Yeah, got to know who to know.
That's right. All these things that I had no idea that I had to do. And so I said, well, what am I going to do? And he says, I have no idea. Well, as you know, Phil, I have a cocktail once in a blue moon, but
every 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, but all of a sudden I tried to condense my whole life into a few months. But so I started reading books, everything I could get my hands on, and there's an amazing book called The Emperors of Chocolate, and it tells about how Forrest Mars and Milton Hershey and how Cadbury started, and all these amazing companies that are huge companies now. And when I got done reading this book, I said to my wife at that time, I'm going to start a candy manufacturing company. And she looked at me and she goes, you're nuts. You're a farmer. Farmers can't start candy manufacturing companies from scratch. And I said, well, I think I can. And so everybody that came into the ranch, I'd say, I got a candy company. And all of a sudden, they said, you can't do that because, farmers are the worst businessmen in the world because they buy everything retail and they sell everything wholesale.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Buy a tractor, they sell it to you retail, you sell your grain at wholesale. So anyway, that became the beginning of Kimmiecandy. And since then, and now, periodically I sit on the board of trustees with the guys that are running Hershey's and Mars and Ferrara and Jelly Bellies people. So, it's just, if you have enough grit and determination, you can do anything in life, right? And I think I'm living the American dream, right? I am living the American dream because I'm in the National Auto Museum here in Reno, Nevada, and it is amazing, right? And so I get to walk around and
it is amazing.
It is amazing.
It is amazing.
And
it is amazing. For those of you who have not been here, you need to come down and check us out.
Yeah, because each car has a story. And if each car could talk, you'd have these amazing stories, right? It just would be like that's really the future when AI goes. You're going to be able to walk in front of a car and it'll talk to you and it'll tell you its history and who owned it and where it came from.
But see, you're so spot on. When people talk about the National Automobile Museum, they think of some of the older cars. They haven't been here in a long time. What they don't remember until they get here is all the stories behind it, all the innovators and the heroes that risked every dime. I mean, a lot of them were very much like you. They had so many different careers and so many different things. I don't know if they all started. Well, actually, the moral of the story, if everybody heard, is that it started in a bar.
Yeah.
Your adventure started in a bar. Let's go over to Europe. But then all these different things came to pass. But the people who made it happen, that had the confidence, that had the support, that took a chance, you said yourself, you're living the American dream. A lot of hard work, a lot of this, and
And a little bit
it starts
of luck.
within here, though.
Yeah,
I
that's right.
believe.
You got to have
Passion.
grit and persistence.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many times, in your journeys that you want to give up, and you just have to be persistent and never give up. Because really, I think, I don't believe I'm the smartest guy, but I have a lot of grit and I have a lot of persistence and I have vision, and I think those aspects of life have allowed us to become a national candy company and grow. And I think that's the way the world should be.
Well, I remember the first time I met you. Actually, I don't think I met you that day, but I saw you. You were on a panel and you were discussing something at one of the hotels, and you were telling just a little bit of that story. And I'm going, okay, this guy's got it. He's passionate. Then I got a chance, the pleasure of meeting you, and then going to some of these parties that we're both not quite sure how we got invited to. That's our inside joke. How did you get here? Every time I see him, I go, how did you get invited to this party? But it makes a big difference. If there's people here watching locally and all over the place, what's one thing you'd like to convey to them? Is it any experience? Because I think just the story you just told in the last 10 minutes, there's like 12 episodes just from your first experience in the farm. You're 17, going over to Spain, coming back here, going to, was it Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and then going all over the world. You just mentioned about 12 countries around the world. I couldn't even begin to find out, like, where do I even start to get a connection like that? You did it all. I mean, your last part of your career was in but when was the candy part? Was it in your 30s,
Well, that
40s?
was my 50s.
Your 50s.
Yeah. Yeah. In my in my 50s, because I'm over 70 now. So it's my 50s. And so that became the next adventure. And I think people have to realize that you're never too old for anything. Yeah. Right? People
Never give up either.
Never give up, because people in their mind think as they get a certain age, that they're old, but you're never old. You're only as old as you believe you are. Right?
Yeah, it's up here, and you got to keep trying. Half the people here that I learned stories about them, innovators in the cars and the technology, they were this close to giving up, and they made it. Or some of them were this close to succeeding, and they gave up, and then someone else took that idea and went to the next level.
Mind.
Yeah, yep. It's such an important thing. I talk to a lot of young people, and some of them just have this expectation, I'm just going to get it like tomorrow. I should be running this company like right now. I go, you have so many learning experiences. Humility is one that you said. That's a big one. Grit, perseverance. But I think you got to have a good heart. You got to understand the other side and be a good listener. And the short time I've known you, I got to be honest with you, I've really admired you for what you've done. Just the commitment you made to this community as well. All the things we just talked about, you didn't talk once about everything you've done for this community. You have done so much for especially the National Automobile Museum. So we go ahead and have like one of the largest Halloween events here. You say, how many pallets do you need? You come down there, because if it's about kids, organizations, sure, you're constantly doing that. And a lot of times I have people, on the show, they start off with everything they've done for the community. You didn't bring it up. I had to bring it up. So I want to thank you on behalf of the community and just everyone here at the National Automobile Museum. Any parting words for those who are watching today?
I think the one thing I believe is this is our community. This is where we live. This is where we love. So you have to take care of everything around you in some manner. And so I think, all I can say is that we need to be cognizant of our community and help those that we can help, and do things for people we love. And basically, I think we respect a lot of the people that are in town and what they're doing. And I think we just got to go from there. And I thank you, Phil, because
Nah.
you've actually made the National Auto Museum fun. Because before you were here, I'd never came in. I mean, I maybe have came in once or twice, but you're starting to create the atmosphere where people want to come in.
Well, I appreciate that. We have a great team. The truth is, we couldn't do it without the board. The board says, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to get it done. I'm lucky enough to be the person who gets to help make that all happen. But thank you very, very much for your time. For those of you who are not familiar with Joe, please look at Kimmie. Is it gimmiecandy.com?
Kimmiecandy.com.
Gimmie.com. And I can tell you that I can personally be a testimony to these last two chins came on by our last interactions and some of the things we're trying to partner on. So, Joe, thank you very much for your time. And please come back and watch us again on What Drives Reno. Thank you.